Shop now at dresses.com.
Meet the couch that suits your comfort. Shop now.
All these ads were generated from a single N8N workflow completely on autopilot using just a single product and actor image. It handles everything from coming up with ad ideas to choreographing beautiful ad videos, as you can see. The whole system is built like a creative team. It has video directors, creative directors, quality control agents that work together to ensure the final output is actually good and realistic. It took me 3 whole days to build and test this system, and today I'm going to show you exactly how it works and also give it to you completely free. You can grab the template directly in my free Skool community. Link will be in the description below, where you'll get access to this and many other resources I've already shared. By the way, my next video is going to be around building a beautiful front end for this particular system. So if you want to also see that, be sure to subscribe. And for those of you who don't know, I'm Mahmoud. I spent 6 years as a software engineer before co-founding an AI agency with my partner Max, and I'm also a creator. On this channel, I try my best to show you the AI and automation world from the perspective of a software engineer without the gimmicks. So if that sounds good, let's get to the video. All right, so the system is split into 2 parts or workflows. The first part is responsible for coming up with the ad idea, title, and also the opening frame image. And the second part is responsible for generating a final ad video from those details. And the reason I designed it in 2 separate parts is to make it cost effective. As you know, generating videos with top AI models may actually cost a bit. And like for instance, the model we have here is VO 3.1 fast, which costs around 30 seconds for every 8-second video, while the quality version, meaning their cutting edge version, costs around $1.20 per 8-second video. And so what I'm doing here is making sure that we actually like the ad title idea and also the opening frame image before we actually get into the costly part of the process. Okay, now I'm going to be walking you through each of these nodes step by step at a high level, but before I do that, I would like to first execute this workflow so that you can first see it in action. That way it would make much more sense. And for this, I'm going to head over to Airtable. For those of you who don't know what Airtable is, think of it as a smarter and more flexible version of a spreadsheet. It basically works the exact same way, but I just like the interface more, and it also acts like a mini database, I think you could say. And currently here we have 2 tables. Let me explain to you what these tables are about. The first one is the ad settings table. This is where we are going to add and configure our products that we want to generate advertisements or ad videos for. So we go to product URL. You have to add your product URL here, which is basically the image of your product. And then the model URL, for instance, if I clicked on this model, you can see it's a male model that I have generated using AI. And then other options here include video model. You can basically choose what model you want to use in order to generate this ad video. Then aspect ratio here, which includes portrait and landscape for now, and also a CTA, which stands for call to action. For those of you who don't know, it's basically what you want the actor in the video to say. And finally, we have a column called is active. This is going to determine which of these products the workflow is going to actually generate these ads for. And as you can see, currently we only have one that is active, and that is for a dress, and this is the model, while this is the dress. Let me show it to you real quick. As you can see, a picture of a red dress. All right, so this is the first table. We have a second table here. By the way, don't worry, I'm going to be, sharing the schema for this table as well. So the only thing you'll have to do later is just import it after downloading it using this option here, as I'm going to be exporting it as CSV so that you won't have to, start it from scratch. This second table we have here again is called the ads table, and this is what's going to be populated entirely by our first part of this workflow. And basically, once you have a product configured and activated, the workflow is going to start populating this table as it starts running. And the columns that we have here are ad setting ID. This is basically just to connect each of these records here to a corresponding record in the ad settings, so that when we run this workflow here, it would know which settings to use when it wants to generate a video. And then we have the title, idea, and the image URL, which again, as I mentioned earlier, is going to be taken care by off by this workflow here. It's going to come out with the title, idea, and finally an image. For example, we have this one here for the red dress with the female model. And what we'll do next is once this workflow runs, it's going to create a record in this table, right? And the status is going to be set to new. And from there, we'll just look at the title, idea, and then also look at the image to see if it's actually realistic and something that's worth generating a video for. And if we think so, we'll click on proceed, which basically means we approve it. And the second option we have here is reject, and which obviously means that no further action is going to be taken on this particular ad idea. And finally, we have the video URL field here, which is going to be populated by the second part of this workflow. All right, now that we looked at the high level overview of this system and understood how these tables here work and connect, what I'm going to do now is just, run an example here so that we can see it in action. And I'm just going to keep the same one as active for now. It's going to be basically an ad on the red dress that we saw earlier. So for this, I'm just going to go ahead and click on execute so that it can start doing its thing. All right, so it is complete. Let's actually head over to the table to see what it created for us. So you can see that we have the title here, right? Edge of evening, a poised cinematic threshold between day and night. The gown becomes a symbol of quiet self-assurance and transformation, focusing on anticipation and the grounded calm before the night begins. And when we take a look at the picture, you can see that we have a pretty decent opening frame image for our ad. And for this particular instant, I'm actually going to approve this so that we can see how this gets executed later. But before we actually do that, since we already have the execution data ready, let me walk you through these nodes first, step by step, quickly, before we actually run the second step. I feel like this way it would sink in way better for you. All right, so we first start with the schedule trigger, which basically determines the interval of which a workflow executes in. In this case, it's 1 every hour, and it's followed by an Airtable node, which fetches data from the ad settings table. And in this case, its filter is looking for records that are active or have its is active column set to true. And you can see that we only have one that meets that condition, hence why we have one item returned by this execution here. And the next thing we have here is the loop over items node, which in our case helps us to batch the executions to one at a time. So for example, if this get at settings didn't return one item but it returned 5, what this would have done was it would basically make each of the item go through this pipeline one by one instead of pushing them through all together at once. And the next node we have here is a set node called combine images, and it does exactly that. It basically takes the product URL and the model URL from the ad settings here and puts it in an array called images, and that later gets passed to a split out node to turn it from a single item or a single array of images to 2 independent image URLs. Then those URLs get passed to this HTTP request node, which then downloads them, as you can see here. So this is for the dress and this is for the model. These images later get passed to this image classifier agent, whose only purpose is to describe what it's seeing. You are a vision analysis agent inside an automated ad creation workflow. I won't get too detailed into this as you already have access to the resources, so you could basically check it out yourself. But at a high level, it just basically describes what it sees. And to the right, we can see the output that it generated. So the first one is for the dress. A full-length eye-level photograph shows a vibrant red floor-length gown displayed on a white headless mannequin. And the second one is for the model. A head and shoulders portrait of a woman with light skin. And with that, those gets passed to this aggregate node, which basically does the exact opposite of what this split out node did. In this case, it took the two items and aggregated them into a single item that we can pass to the next agent, which is the creative director agent or LLM. By the way, before we get to here, let's talk about the tool I'm using here. As you can see, the model I'm using for this is Gemini 2.5 Pro. As for the tool I'm using to connect to these models, I'm using OpenRouter, as it allows us to just connect to any LLMs that are out there through a single interface. So instead of having to create or configure the API and the credentials every time we try to use a different model from a different provider, we could just configure it once. So for example, as you can see here, I'm connected to Gemini 2.5 Pro for this, and on the next agent here, I'm actually connected to OpenAI's GPT-5, all through a single account, so it makes life way easier. The next thing we have here is the creative director agent. Again, the prompt consists of a user message which has the details of the product and the model, and also some settings from the ad settings record. So you can see here we are passing in the aspect ratio we want the image to be in. And then as for the system message, we are telling it that it is a creative director, the creative lead in automated ad creation workflow, and the outputs it should come up with are the title, the idea, and also the opening frame prompt, which is then going to be passed to an image generation model, which in this case is Nano Banana, to actually generate that image. And if you scroll to the bottom here, we have a section called feedback, which only gets displayed if there is a feedback. And we'll look at how this works exactly, as this scenario actually played out in this execution. So we'll be looking at that and understanding this better in just a bit. Now let's take a look at the output it created for us. So we got the title, Edge of Evening, then the idea and the opening frame prompt, which then gets passed to this HTTP request node, which sends a image generation request to Nano Banana through Kie.AI, which is a marketplace for generative AI tools such as VO3, Sora 2, and in this case, Nano Banana. And to be able to use this, you would have to create an account at Kie.AI and then basically create a token or an API key that you would have to later configure under this HTTP request node. As you can see here, I have one configured already, and this is what you'll have to do for yourself as well. And with that, you'll be good to go. And here we got the input parameters, the name of the model, the prompt, then the image URL so that it could use them as a reference to generate an image from, then the image size, which corresponds to aspect ratio. And to the right, you can see the output of this request. It consists of a code and a message and also data, which includes a task ID. This is what we are going to be using in this part of the workflow. So what this part does is it basically first waits for a specified period of time, in this case for 5 seconds, and then it executes this HTTP request node, which actually takes in the task ID that was generated by this request here, and it uses it to poll for the status of the request. So it says, hey, is the request complete, right? If then it returns the response to the next field, next node here. This node checks whether or not if the state is successful. If it is, it will continue with the workflow. If it's not, it goes back into this loop until this is actually complete. Once this is successful, what's going to happen is we have a set node where we extract the image URL from the response and also the data that was output by the creative director agent here. And the reason we are doing that is because we want to feed that data back into the creative director in cases where there is a feedback, so that it could compare its previous output with the feedback to adjust its next output, as we're going to be seeing in just a bit. So the next node we have here is the download add image, which basically takes in the image URL from the previous node and then downloads it, and this is the result. Then this image gets passed to our add image validator agent or quality control agent that basically looks for mistakes such as products being out of scale or anything that defeats realism, such as the defiance of gravity or anything that looks unnatural in general. And this is its prompt. Again, I'm not going to get into detail here. You could check it out yourself if you want to. And what it does is it outputs 2 parameters here. One is called is valid and the other one is called suggestion. If is valid is true, then the suggestion is going to be empty. But in cases where is valid is set to false, when it does spot something that looks unnatural, it is going to also include a suggestion. So we can actually see that the first time it entered the add image validator, it did come up with a feedback. And let's take a look at what the feedback looked like. So it said the image is not a full-length shot as requested in the prompt. The model's feet and the bottom of the gown are cut off, but the prompt specifies the entire model and gown should be visible from head to toe. As you can see, this is why having this part in the workflow is very important. And so what it did was it then passed its output to this if node, and this if node simply checks if is valid is equals to true. If it is false, which it was in the first entrance, that's when we go back to our creative director agent, and where the part that I mentioned to you earlier actually takes action. You can see here that the second time it went in, the second time we called the creative director agent, we now have a feedback along with it. So we are telling it, hey, look, this is the current data that we have, and this is the feedback. And from this, our creative director agent is able to adjust its previous output and emphasize more on the need to have both the product and the model fully fit in the frame. And the second time it went through, it did the exact same thing. So it generated a second image, which by the way costs 2 cents per image. So in this case, we kind of spent around 4 cents excluding the inference. The inference probably didn't even cost a cent in total here. So you could safely say this whole thing to generate the image idea title and the opening prompt cost us just 4 cents. And anyway, the second time it went into the image validator agent, it approved of it. So the suggestion was empty. Therefore, it was able to create the add idea or create a record in the ads table. And that is what we are looking at now. And with that, we are done with the first part of the workflow. And so this means we can now click on proceed so that we could continue with the second part of this workflow. Now I'm going to start executing this, and notice how the status is going to change from proceed to processing. And the reason we are doing that here is to prevent any simultaneous processing of the same record at the same time. So we are essentially creating a guardrail here to ensure that a record is only processed once at a time. Now I'm going to click on execute workflow here and head over back to the table, and we should be able to see that the process indeed, the status indeed did change to processing. And let's take a look at what's going on here. All right, so the process is complete. Now let's take a look at what the result looks like. I'm going to go ahead and click on the video URL and hope for the best.
Shop now at dresses.com.
Honestly, I think is really good considering how this whole thing just cost me 34 cents. Imagine having a product and just coming up with an ad for it at this caliber for just 34 cents. It even has its own transition and all. So overall, really happy with the results. But yeah, that's basically how this workflow works. Now let's take a look at the second part here and understand what's going on under the hood. This one also starts with a schedule trigger, and when we take a look, it also runs every hour. And then the second node here is the get ads node, and this time this node here fetches from the ads table, and it's looking for records that have its status set to proceed. And what it does after fetching them is updating their status for the reason that we talked about earlier, to basically ensure that a record is only processed one at a time. And then we enter back into this loop over items node, which, as I mentioned, helps us batch these executions into one at a time. Then we have another Airtable node, and this time what we are doing here is we are basically getting the settings for an ad, and that's exactly what this ad setting field here is being used for, right? So it goes in, let's say in our case it was this record here, it pulls this record, and then it says, okay, what are the settings for this ad? It uses this ad settings ID to look from the ad settings table, and it's able to see that, hey, this guy wants me to generate a video using the VO 3.1 model, and then using this aspect ratio with the CTA and so on. So that's exactly what it's being used for in this case. And the next thing we do again is using the HTTP request node to download the image, which then gets passed to a video director agent. And let's take a look at that as well. So this agent gets past this image data, and along with that also the details of the ad, such as the title, the idea, the aspect ratio, and also the CTA if it exists. This is its system message. You are the commercial video director, the director responsible for transforming an advertisement concept into a professional 8-second cinematic video sequence suitable for direct input into an advanced video generation model. You will receive a final image, ad title, ad idea, opening frame, and here is more detail into its role. Again, I'm not going to get into detail. You can check it out yourself. And this is the output it came up with. So this is the prompt. Create an 8-second vertical premium cinematic spot following one continuous master scene. And this is where it breaks it down into its seconds, so 0 to 2.2 seconds, then 2.2 to 4.2. It also includes things like transitions, as we also saw. So it basically acts as a video director. And this prompt then gets passed to VO3 again through Kie.AI. And the same process takes place here, where it basically checks for its status and continues to do so until it is complete. And once it is complete, it updates the record in our Airtable by basically adding the video URL that it just received from the request. So, and that video URL is here, and it belongs to the clip that we just watched. So yeah, that's about it. This is how the workflow works. And honestly, I'm pretty impressed by the outcome. As you can see here, I think it's pretty affordable for 34 cents. Being able to come up with, ads for your videos is pretty luxurious if you ask me. And I want to also, by the way, expand on this workflow later by making it so that it allows us to stitch multiple different videos together to create an even longer form of ad videos. But that's the task for another video. So if you want to also see that in the future, be sure to subscribe. Again, my next video is going to be building a nice front end for this system so that we don't have to interact with it through Airtable, but actually have a nice interface to do so. Finally, my opinion about this whole thing, by the way, I think automating this, as nice as it is, I think is still not the most effective way to go about it, at least for now, because in my opinion, it would still be better if you just, did everything yourself, because you would have way more control. That way you could also stitch multiple videos together. You could do lip sync and all those stuff. So I also want to make a video on that soon, where I'll attempt to build full-blown ad videos that will go for around 40 seconds. That will also include things like CGI, VFX, A rolls, and B rolls. So I'm pretty excited for that. I'm gonna actually start working on that soon after the next video. So again, stay tuned for that. Another reason to do so. And lastly, if you want to build any kind of automations for your business, be sure to check out my agency site at aiautomate.io, where you could book a consultation with me and we could go over a discovery call to look at what exactly your requirements are. But with that said, I'll see you in the next one. Take care.